So in performance, this is always, right, like we play sports to play sports. And so the piece here is everyone's focused on the technical, tactical stuff, always, the sport, and I get it. Yeah, I didn't sign up for soccer to go to a weightlifting class, right? Like that's not why. I signed up for soccer because I want to go kick the ball around and play. And then the next piece is like, oh, okay, to get good at the soccer, we got to do some physical training, right? We got to get stronger, faster. And then these kind of other pieces get lost, these kind of core fundamentals. And what Exos did is kind of flip them on its head, where it's really the core fundamentals. And I feel like this is one of the things that's taken a ton of time to move forward. And I think a lot of people get this kind of stuff now. And maybe it's just me with maturity. At the time I was younger, didn't get it, but now older and more experiences, I'm understanding that. So they've kind of grouped it into mindset, nutrition, movement, recovery. So if you can kind of bucket it down to these basic pieces, that's the core fundamentals that get you through your day-to-day. If you do these really well, that sets a good foundation for your physical training. Then if you're good, fit, strong, mobile, stable, all those pieces, then you can go execute on whatever you want. And a really interesting thing that's happening now in sports, with the Chinese, for instance, they have a huge abundance of athletes, right? Massive population. And so with the Olympics coming up, they're not great at winter sports. It's not been a big part of their culture. So they've taken a good chunk of their martial arts people, and they've just put them on snowboards and said, okay, let's see if you can get this going. And they had a high level, like not their super high level martial artists, but definitely on a high level, threw them on snowboards, and within a month they're doing 900 McTwist whatevers in a half pipe. And so they had these fundamental movement patterns, fundamental skills to be able to apply it to other tasks. They just had to, get the skill-specific piece. So we always kind of focus like, oh, you need to train more in that one particular sport. But if you have the underpinning skills to make something happen, you can apply it to a lot of different things. And so the other thing is with training, right, if you look at 2 hours a day, 7 days a week, right, it ends up to be about 480 hours. But yet there's another 7,000 in the calendar to improve. So if you do the good core fundamental piece as well, right, like this is just the total training of a year tacked up in what it would be in complete days. And if you look at it like this, there's a lot more opportunity to upgrade. Sleep should be probably, 50% of that, which gets lost and is becoming a bigger topic these days. Having this kind of shared vision with the people that you work with, and I know Leo's like this, I'm like this, is trying to surround ourselves around people that have an understanding of the spectrum, that you may fit somewhere in here, but you have a common language so you can communicate effectively to be able to make that process and help the athlete move along. It's when, and I'm sure we've all experienced it at some point, it's in the healthcare system where one of these pieces start to break that we run into troubles. So trying to have a seamless scenario that works. What makes sense for me for training? Anytime I've worked with a coach, really any sport, this is really what it's coming down to. If you ask a coach what they want, typically they want explosive actions. They want somebody to run, jump, move, all in a very explosive way, and they want that to be repetitive, right? You start out, we're doing smaller explosive actions and then going into big explosive actions routinely over time. And that really boils down to power. And power is work divided by time. The cool thing here is it's not about just working hard. And the little story around this was when I was at Bayern Munich, one of our players, who's still there now actually, Frank Ribéry, a very good French soccer player, he said, Darce, I'm one of the best players in the world and I've never picked up a weight. Why should I start now? I was like, that's a good point, and I was very set in my ways of, hey, this is how we're going to go, this is what we're going to do. But when he said that, I was like, yeah, I can't really argue. You are one of the best players in the world. and you haven't lifted any weights, but can you still get better? And so the answer was yes. So what we did is I was like, hey, when you're out on the pitch, you still want to move well, you want to move fast, you want to be dynamic. He's like, yeah, of course. I said, okay, perfect. So that's the skill of what he's doing, right? It's a time-based, efficiency-based metric. And then the other one was movement efficiency. So just cleaning up how well he moved, how well he ran, how well he cut, what his body mobility was like. Then he started to move better, feel better, and we didn't really lift any weight. It was just his body weight, which you could argue is weight. But then once we kind of tackled everything here, he's like, all right, what's next? I'm good at everything. And I was like, the next thing is just to put load on. Like, we just got to make it harder. And so then that was kind of how we won him over the work side of the fence. But I think a lot of people focus on just the work side, and they don't necessarily focus on this movement efficiency piece. But in sports that are very high skill-based, you can approach it this way. Like soccer is a very high skill-based sport. You're playing with your feet that aren't that coordinated, right, compared to what you use in your hands. So if we work on movement efficiency and the skill, that can make you powerful because you can do the same amount of work in less time, right? You don't necessarily have to be big and strong and all those pieces. If you're just super efficient, then you get that same amount of power. I usually put a picture up as this kind of umbrella of protection, right? If your umbrella of mobility, stability, and all the components that help you moderate stress is so big, and you're moving this much, get that, it's good because it's raining out so everyone gets it. I don't get wet, right? I have a big umbrella to keep me dry. What happens is when we end up, having maybe injury issues, mobility issues, things of that nature, that now our umbrella of protection is shrinking, but yet we still feel like we're 20 and we still think we can move like we can, and we're getting outside the boundaries of that umbrella is when we get wet or injured. And how wet and how injured is the other piece. And so when people come in for therapy, right, we do evaluation plan, and the first thing we try and do is restore your overall mobility and stability. Because you kind of, has anyone seen, I'm not sure that where it actually comes from, is that evolution of man from a baby to a man down to a monkey down to an older person, right? And when we're born with all this mobility and stability. So if you think of a baby that you've maybe seen recently, if they're a good, healthy baby, they're very mobile, at the moment, very unstable, but they have tons of ranges of motion. And then as they develop, they find stability to be able to then take a step. But nobody's necessarily coaching them, right, on what to do. It just happens. It's reflexes. So it's in our nervous system. And that's sometimes when you can make these kind of magical woo-woo things happen in treatments, that if you connect a few dots, you can make some really crazy changes really fast. And so if this is how we rehab people, how do we train people? And it should be essentially the same thing, maybe in a little different order because you have some more functions. So we still have the mindset, nutrition, recovery. Then our rehab, prehab turns into what we call pillar strength. So the ability of how well our shoulders, abdominals, and hips work together. Because typically in most sports and what we do, that's the transfer of energy is through our trunk, from our lower body to our upper body or vice versa. So whether it's throwing, running, most of the movements end up going through here. So having this piece really well coordinated is like the hub of the wheel, and then your arms and your legs are like your spokes. Then we work on plyometrics. And so the first piece of plyometrics, right, is, so there's three phases to a plyometric: an eccentric, a concentric, and an isometric at the bottom. So if I go down, that's a negative, that's an eccentric. Then I pause in my isometric, then I have a concentric, right? And a jump is just down, and then I'm actually just leaving the ground. And so the squatting is essentially the first step of a plyometric, right? And then I can work on going down quicker to where I'm catching myself to be able to control each time to where I jump. And then if I'm dropped off a plane, can I hold and land hold and land, and then be able to then take off. So those are the kind of the phases of jumping, and just how quickly you lower, right, is controlling that eccentric phase, and then how hard you can push up is the concentric phase. And in running and jumping, just like flying a plane, I haven't really flown a plane, so I can't say this honestly, but I'm assuming, I'm making some big assumptions, so if there's any pilots, you can justify my statement here. Is it seems like to me that taking off is a lot easier than landing, right? Taking off, I hit the gas, pull up, and away I go. Where landing, there's a lot more things that have to happen to get that plane safely on the ground. Would that be a fair statement that everyone would agree with?
Yes.
And so with plyometrics, it's the same thing. The landing part is the hardest because of all those forces that are coming in gravity, the 9.8 meters per second squared, coming down on your body. So to do it 2 legs is much easier, right? You got some balance, you can lean one more than the other, but then to be able to do it 1 leg over and over and over and over and over, just like a run, right, to get it going, that's a lot harder. So I was just at a course actually with a group in Altus and a very famous track and field coach, Dan Paff. And so one of the things he does with his runners, Olympic level, elite level, world record athletes, is they'll jump for 80 meters. And it won't be heavy jumps, right? It'll just be here, up, 30. So he's just looking for, can they absorb in the ankle, knee, and hip simultaneously, or do you land and break at your hip, or do you stay up and go just in your knees? You want to be able to absorb through all parts at the same time. And they don't have to be big jumps. So when you jump, where do you land? Do you feel good? Jump, jump. You do 80 meters of this, you get a workout. It's really good and just nice and easy, right? It doesn't have to be like full gas all the time, but you end up getting that feeling of just where your body needs to be in space, right? Because if I jump and I'm too forward, I stumble, then I have to catch myself. If I'm too far back, right, like, oh, that hurt, land on the heels and you jar all those forces. So you just get just nice and easy, and you sit into each of those positions, and does the movement look good and clean? And then try and do that on 1 leg, where it's here, up, up, for the same kind of distance. And you'll feel it'll get heavy, your legs will get tired, but just that basic easy repetition will move it along. So then you get into movement skills. So I didn't break this one down, so I'll walk it through. You wouldn't happen to have a Sharpie for the mirror, would you? So movement skills, I'll make it really simple. I have my list. So in running, there's kind of either I'm going forward, right, or backwards, or I'm changing directions. So if we think of linear and multi-directional, so that's the first bucket.
How are your hands?
What's that?
How are your hands?
Good, I think.
Good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Didn't even question it. I don't know if it'll be. So we'll have linear and then multi. So you can break linear down into 2. There's 2 components of linear movement: acceleration and absolute speed, right? So that's just acceleration, no different than a car. I'm getting up to speed and then I'm hanging out at speed. And there's 2 different mechanics to those, but that's it. That's how you run fast. You get really good at that and you're off to the races.
Isn't there 3 components: acceleration, absolute speed, and speed maintenance?
I would say absolute speed and speed maintenance are the same. So just when you get up to absolute speed, you're maintaining that speed. So for my simply, if it changes for you, certainly we could talk about it. Then in multi-directional, we have your base, right? So you want a good position, you want good angles to be able to push left, right, be good balance. Do I got to push forward, turn, go back? Then there's a push is the first movement, right? Is just here, and then you gotta push. So if I wanna go right, I gotta push right. What happens to a lot of people is they step right. And that's not fast because I'm pulling. So in basketball, when I went through, you would see that people would do this and they would pull themselves. That's not, you're pulling yourself over, that's not fast. It's more keeping that foot there. I can push, 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 right? That's what gets me there. And then if I push and I gotta change, I can go the other way. So that's a push. Oh, perfect. So multi-direction, base, push. And then we have a crossover. Oops, not a crossover. Crossover. So a crossover is if I'm in this position and I know I'm going that way, a crossover is I'm gonna push, and then I'm gonna push here, drive, which is then in an acceleration position, and then I'm accelerating to absolute speed. Then you have drop step, right? I'm here, and I'm just opening up, dropping to then go, and I can open up at various angles. One thing I'll tell you, this is a huge piece of making people fast, is there's what I call the negative shin angle, right? So if you're looking at my tibia to my foot, that's a negative shin angle, a neutral shin angle, and a positive shin angle. If I always, and I go here, and I stop, I'm in a negative shin angle, right? I stop myself, but I have a really hard time to get going again because I gotta get up and over to be able to get into a positive position to then push again. So when you see a lot of people run, I don't know if I can even demonstrate it. If they run and they're heel striking, every time they're heel striking and they're landing out in front, they're stopping themselves. Then they have to overcome that to then push. So it's like driving down the road like all the way along. And so think of running like a bike. So if this is a bike, and this is the hub of the wheel, that's your hip, right? And so as you run, your foot needs to be landing under your lateral center of mass. So if I come up and I come down and I hit under, now I'm constantly pushing myself forward, and that's efficiency. If I'm coming around and I'm landing in front of me, right, that's now riding a bike with a square wheel, right? You stop, you come over, you go, you stop, you come over, you go, and that takes a lot of work, besides all the forces that are coming up. All right, so we have base, push, crossover, drop step, and then the last one is we have to be able to stop, is deceleration, right? So can I go forward and stop and land in a positive shin angle so I can then either decide to go forward, I can go here and change direction, I can go here and turn, but I have to be able to stop, no different in our jumps, right, in this position. So where those single leg plyometrics start to get you really good is being able to stop in those positions always. And then it's through it's through all three joints, but your hip is the break, for sure. All right. So we have linear, acceleration, and absolute speed. So acceleration is really easy, right? You're in a nice line, it's just all physics. You're in a nice line position here, just like pistons in a car. You're just driving constantly to move forward. That's like sled work and all that stuff is really good. The other good thing is like going up on treadmills, hill climbs, right? It puts you in that natural position, because if you're climbing in a hill and take too big a step, you're gonna go back down the hill, right? Where you end up stepping under the right place to move you in that position. But I think as we acquired shoes with big cushy soles, it took away the response of when you hit really hard on your heel, right? So you don't feel that anymore and you don't change. So one of the things that we do a lot is a lot of barefoot or sock foot running, and you feel really quick where you need to be when you're running and moving. What else can I talk about there? Oh, absolute speed. So absolute speed, just good, tall posture, position. It's kind of hard because obviously running is a dynamic motion, so you're talking about little steps like photographs in time. So as I'm going, basically I've run, right? I've pushed off. Now I want to try and get my toe up to pull my heel up into my hip. And so now I'm in what they call a figure 4 position, right? And the reason for that, you'll see people that run and they have these big backside mechanics. What happens is it takes a long time for you to bring that leg around, versus if I push and then I drive that heel up, now I got a really small lever arm to come through and drive down again. And so as you go through, then you're cycling around, lands underneath you, and you keep it going. The hard part is that's really hard. So if we went out and ran, I would say there's a small percentage in this group that could probably do it well. And it's no dig on anybody, it's just a matter of fact. Because it takes posture, it takes stability to be able to hold yourself in a position, cycle this through, and then maintain it. So what we end up doing is, I'm not a huge fan of the long, slow runs because we tend to get really monotonous and just kind of hang on our tissues. Where I like to go more for 15 seconds, posture up like you got to go somewhere, then walk for 15. Go for 15, walk for 15. The heart rate and the calorie expenditure is really no different, and actually probably a little better if you do more of the interval-based stuff, because you can posture up and go somewhere, right? You're going to take all these things. It takes some energy, you're using a lot more stuff, you're not hanging on your tissues and ligaments, then walk it out, catch your breath, keep going. And you can go 15-15, 30-30, minute, 3 minutes on, 1 minute off, but you can then move with purpose in a good way than to be banging on your joints and knocking things out.
Does that help going from a square to a circle, or is that another mechanism that you need to train to get rid of that square?
It takes awareness. Yeah. You definitely want to get out of the square and move to the circle. Did I answer
Yeah,
that?
I just didn't know if that more 15 off, 15 on would help that.
Oh yeah, it would help this considerably, because what happens is we go into this mode
right
quickly. Is we start like kind of hanging on our tissues, we overstride, and we're just kind of banging around on our body essentially. Where if you do the 15 on, 15 off, it'll be much easier because you have to run with purpose, so you'll end up cleaning things up. Another little thing is just cadence-wise. So typically if you run with slower RPMs, you'll end up overstriding to balance yourself out. So what they say is kind of that 90 RPM, so 1 foot going around 90 times a minute. So you can just break it down, like count it for 15 seconds, and if you're in the high 80s to 90s, that'll typically correct that overstride.
Your lower seeing some elite athletes. How many of them are missing this component of the running, the posturing, and is that fixable for what you do with it?
Totally, it's all awareness. They have the components. It's just awareness and habits.
For the majority of them do. I mean, some of these guys are super fast. Are they have this already, or
some have it already. Totally, it's totally ingrained in their system, and then some they're battling their own. And I could name off when I was at Bayern, Andreas Arnold, a midfielder. Right, he was a midfielder because they don't have to run fast; they just have to move and change directions quickly. But it was self-selecting because he was a heavy heel striker. Another guy who was playing at Tottenham, played for us at Rome, his name's Federico Fazio, an Argentinian guy, 6'5", but super, strong, fit, all those things. But because he is so tall, he would tend to overstride to control himself because he would end up running with smaller people, right? And so, but for him, he's got the genetics, and that's part of why Usain Bolt's so fast, is he's got a big upper body, very skinny lower body, but his power to weight is good, and he's got long legs. So if you just took physics alone, right, the taller person will win. The longer leg person, the RPMs, the power, all that stuff was the same, the taller person's gonna win, because their stride length is gonna win for them. And so that's why his top end speed, he's a little weak on the acceleration, but he crushes people on the top end stuff. Yeah. So yeah, it's all changeable, and it's funny because when guys get it, then it's like they're like, "Oh, did you see me? I was flying," because they just know, like, "Wow, I'm going somewhere," and it's effortless because I'm just keeping momentum moving forward. Right, the body in motion, it tends to stay in motion. So if I'm just keep pushing, it's much easier to keep it going than if I land a little too far in front and stop.
In terms of running mechanics, who's informed your practice the most, as far as the literature goes, or other coaches?
Yeah, I mean, just the science. I think the hard part about running technique is there's a lot of people that change the words to turn it into a marketable thing to then sell it in a package. And there's definitely different categories of folks, right? Like there's maybe more of the elite athletes that have the engine, they have the strength, they have the mobility to do exactly what it is they need to do. And then there's people that don't, and in variations, like scale is huge. And so for somebody that might not have the mobility or the strength, it's just more keeping a simple, easy pace like this. Like this is great running for me because I'm right in there. It's just like a bike. So whether I go here or bigger, the only difference is the amplitude that I put into the ground. The cycle is the same. So it's I don't have any. Dan Paff's a great one. There's people that speak more to the kind of the marathoning community, but it's all just physics and science. So they might be using different words to say the same thing, but when you kind of look at this, right, like it's just an efficiency thing. So movement skills. If you're great at these, this is like music, right? If you know how to play the notes on a piano, you can then start to create your concerto, and it's no different in movement. Then we add strength and power, right? And get that going. And what I didn't say in my power equation, which I should have, is that everything you do has a metabolic consequence, right? Sitting here has a metabolic consequence because your body's got to pump your heart to feed you energy so you stay awake or, just be. So me running around here, right, I got this little Aura ring that's tracking my heart rate and everything. It's going to show that I had higher activity and a higher metabolic response because I'm demonstrating all this stuff. So I'm getting my cardio in. So it's all cardio. It's just how hard you want to go. And two, the other cool thing is it's just physics, right? Like it's numbers. That's why we should stay in school. I try and tell my kids, this is the kind of stuff you'll take with you from school and apply it in sports. So I had one client who was I was playing around with this and I was measuring because we'd have doctors that would say, hey, you can be 50% weight bearing. I'm like, okay, I'm 190 pounds, half. That's how much weight I get to push. Like I would take them literally and go right to the numbers. And then I started seeing how many watts can you do on a bike? And then you produce watts on a treadmill. And if you use this as a little experiment, is walk on a treadmill, look at the watts, and just keep walking, but start changing the incline. The watts go up, right? Because you've got to go up a hill. It takes more power. The funny thing is, if you walk at 15% incline, you're generating more power than if you're jogging. I'm saying 3 kilometers an hour. I've been in Europe a while. I'm Canadian, so I always go to metric. It just makes sense to me. But if you walk at 3 kilometers an hour at 15%, it's about 950 watts. And I think if you go to 3.5, 4, then you get up over 1,000. If you take that same treadmill at a 1% incline, and jog at 5 kilometers an hour, it's about 800 watts, right? So I can burn some fuel walking, right? Like, and then I could add a weight vest, I could add some load, I could go a little faster. And I've had people, I had this one fella, he had a bunch of degenerative knee stuff going. He's like, Darce, I can't run, but I want to lose weight. I was like, sweet, let's just get you on a walking program. He's like, you can lose weight by walking? I'm like, sure. Get on the treadmill, 15%, go for 20 minutes and tell me how you feel when you get off, right? Like, he was smoked, and it was great. It was a good thing. And so he ended up losing like 40 pounds on a walking, and he would just, to make it a little harder, get his heart rate up, he would just add a little more weight. So a weight vest, a backpack, whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of creative ways to get to the end. That's the point. And that's what I learned at Exos, how to rehab people in this very systemized checklist to get them back into play. Then I got to Bayern and I had to Soccerfy it, right? So how did I take all that stuff? And so you have the same piece, right? Like here was just our performance training components. And then we just put them into football. So we still have the mindset, have the guys like, hey, you have to have a good mindset. And you know, we could talk about that. You gotta eat well, whatever you put in is what you get out. We have our evaluation, how you're doing in football. But then we could take all these pieces, right? And just put them into the, quote unquote, warm up, right? And that's gonna be our 15-minute warm up, our 20-minute warm up, our 45-minute warm up. Because soccer coaches, when you say, well, I'm European soccer coaches, you guys might be different. There's this kind of affinity in European soccer to an allergy for the gym, typically. They want to be out on the pitch playing with the ball. I get it. But to operate at a high level, sometimes we have to go in the gym. And so we would end up hiding stuff and just say, okay, coach, we're just going to warm up. And so we would put all this stuff in the warm up. And so it's like, how much warm up do I have today? And he's like, okay, you got 15 minutes today. So in that warm up, I would have a little bit of pillar strength stuff, a little bit of movement prep, so dynamic yoga. We would do some plyometric stuff, and we would do some movement skill stuff, right? All within 15 minutes. And just go, guys are warm, going, breathing hot, all that kind of stuff, and then we get into training. And then we could always add in some strength and power and make that part of the warm up for when we did our 45-minute scenarios. And just have an extended warm up, and maybe, you know, they're burnt out from the soccer side, and they need a little bit of break and some variation in their training. So we would just take a bigger chunk, and that was kind of our warm-up / athletic development stuff. And then the energy system work would just be what you did on the pitch, right? So all the running around and playing, that's where you're getting your metabolic side. So whether you're using small games, 1v1, 2v2, it's very explosive and quick and powerful, or 5v5, which is more like a lactate kind of thing. You could go about 8-10 minutes depending on the quality and the fitness of the guys. Or you could do bigger pitch stuff, which was more kind of aerobic based, that, you know, guys could hide if they want, right? Like, so, okay, the ball's over there, I can get my rest, walk, do whatever, and then, go again, which is very close to our 15-15 walk to run, right? One's just done in a multi-directional, then they're walking while the ball's over there, and then they have to go again and engage in a variety of ways. But you can start to see where it goes. And then when you have these components, right, from rehab, it ends up being like an equalizer board. You can just, you say, okay, what are all my lists of exercise, hardest to lowest, for prehab, pillar strength stuff, metabolic work, movement prep, plyos, movement skills, regen, and we can start, okay, you got injured, you're gonna do a lot of soft tissue work, rehab stuff, but then the soft tissue and joint mobilization stuff goes down, but I can start ramping up these other activities as it changes to where I get into just kind of a normal training distribution. And so what that would look like, so say if you came to see me and you had an ACL injury, you know, week 1, week 2, you're you know, obviously you're injured, you're repairing, recovered, we're working on quad sets, being able to straighten your leg, work on walking normally and pushing off the big toe, is we could go straight into just a wall drill, right? Like we could just go here, you're gonna lean. So now I'm just on my toes, I got an injured knee, I'm doing quad sets, toe raises, but now I'm in an acceleration position. And then I can back up, be in a little more aggressive acceleration position, beyond those toes, now I can march, right? And I'm working on acceleration like week 1 and 2. So when it comes time to running, like these movements aren't foreign to you anymore, right? Like when it comes time to run, you just really just go run. And then this is just it's a lot of abbreviations, so I apologize. The whole point is that you can get these metabolic demands a lot of different ways, right? So I can be non-weight bearing, cycling, I can do it in interval fashion, I can do it resisted walking, I can pull a sled, I can do it a lot of different ways to get that metabolic piece. And I can also get you there from a heart rate, just like we talked about. So in part of the ACL return, people would just walk on the treadmill on an incline. And it was awesome. They would walk, and it would be like hiking up this hill. So you're doing these single leg pieces. You have good mechanics because you have to step underneath. So it's essentially like acceleration mechanics for 30 minutes walking up a treadmill. So they would get in great shape. Their heart rate's up. It would get all the physical and biomechanical demands were all in line, and they were in good shape. So, and when you get off, if you do try that on a treadmill, go for 15 minutes at a 15%. You'll be impressed by how winded you get. And then the second one is as soon as you step off that treadmill, you're gonna be like, woo! Because you had 15 minutes of backside activation of your system being primed to push yourself. So this is just to represent, if you think of these little actions, X's as actions, right? So this would be continuous running. Small actions over a period of time will get you a certain metabolic result. And I can get that same metabolic result if I do a really quick heavy action, wait a little while, do another one, wait a while, and so forth, right? The metabolic response is going to be the same. And then for the middle one, I can do a little heavier continuous activities, or I can just reduce the rest in between these pieces. And then it's this one that you just got to go full gas. Go full gas, rest a little bit, go full gas again, and then you'll get there. And then this is how we would apply it in the sports, right? This would just be an action, and it would be a skill-specific action. Then they would jog, right? Easy recovery, skip, do whatever to here, again, and around the pitch, and we would do that for whatever, 10, 15 minutes, and this would kind of replicate a 10v10 game as far as actions. Not specifically or identically, because we're keeping them contained in a space, but I could have them do other things for the same effect. And then for that middle zone, I could add some more running, so the heart rate gets up, right, and less rest in between these actions. And then the real high intensity interval stuff that everybody's bent on these days, which is kind of essentially CrossFit, is just heavy actions, a little bit of rest, heavy actions, a little bit of rest, and keep going. So I have this love-hate with CrossFit. I love it in some ways because I've done it, I do it, and then I hate it because I see a lot of injuries from it with the therapy stuff. And so to me, CrossFit is essentially the same as triathlon. Any triathletes in the group, right? So do you know the history of triathlon, where it started?
No, I don't.
Okay, so it started in Hawaii with a bunch of people, or not a bunch, a few people that just said, hey, let's see who can swim out there and back, get on a bike around the island in Hawaii, and then go run, and we'll time. And it was just this game that they went out and they did it. And then that was really the birth of it. The interesting thing is when you look at the history of it, the history of also overuse injuries went up as triathlon got more popular. Because people were like, oh, I want to go give it a try. They weren't prepped, right? And they went out and they got IT band problems, shin splints, all this stuff, right? Because they were uninformed. We were all uninformed. It just seemed like a good idea to go crush yourself for that time period and see who could stand at the end. And CrossFit started the same way, right? It was a bunch of people saying, hey, who could do these different activities and do it as fast as you can? The hard part about a competition is you have to normalize it, right? Like, it's not a competition if I'm doing 50 pounds and you're doing 100 pounds, because then you're going to say, like, well, I did 100 pounds and I still whooped you. And so it essentially got started the same way. And so they said, okay, well, we got to normalize the weight, just like you normalize the distance in triathlon. So it's like, we're picking up whatever pounds, 100 pounds, you're going to do it 50 times, and you're going to sprint there, do another 50, you know, or whatever the sequence of activities were, and then whoever is done at the end wins. Right? Again, we didn't really know what we were doing too much because it was just a dare, and then they started going, and then we got a bunch of overuse injuries. And so what happens is now we're getting much smarter. And so in triathlon, we got smarter around heart rate, managing loads, managing distances, all those things, right? And we use mainly heart rate as an idea. Now we have enough technology to manage what the actual workload is in watts. But before we didn't, so it started with heart rate because that was something we could measure. And now with CrossFit, same thing. One thing is, everyone got the idea that when I walk into a CrossFit gym, it's compete time, right? And again, if I got into any kind of competition, like, how many competitions do competitions every day? Not many, right? Like, you could say basketball, hockey, and that's every, you know, they could go one night, maybe baseball, but again, the demands there aren't like CrossFit. And so you have to pick up the right weight for the activity you're doing. And so in those metabolic sessions, they're metabolic sessions. So the primary reason for them is metabolically. And so we always say in the performance world, you can't serve two masters. You're either getting strong or you're getting fit, but you can't do the same. And you can use one for the other, but one will win, for sure. And if you want to work on pure strength, you just have to work on pure strength, rest, then try and lift a lot of weight, rest, lift a lot of weight. That's how you get strong. For the metabolic stuff, because everything has a metabolic consequence, we got to reload that. As soon as you start doing a lot of repetitions, your metabolic system gets into effect. And so if you're picking up strength weight, but trying to do metabolic activities, your umbrella is shrinking for what you're trying to do, and that's where the injuries come. So now they're getting a lot smarter with it. We're getting a lot smarter with it. So in those pieces, it's like, hey, today you're training, and we're going to make appropriate loads, percentages of RMs for a metabolic scenario to then move you along so you don't get hurt. So that's my 2 cents on it. So I like it, but it can go wrong really fast just because of the effort involved. And then you have to recover, right? And I got this from Nick Grantham. You can have all this woo-woo stuff that's out there, right? But if you don't, have a good attitude, you don't rest, sleep, take food in, you can do all the crazy, what I call the Hollywood stuff, the stuff that gets all the attention. It won't matter. This is like 1-2% improvement stuff. But if you're not getting basic things like sleep, that's going to have more of an impact on your ability to recover than getting in a nice tub or doing some stim unit or any of those things. You got to do the fundamentals well first. Then you'll maximize the other stuff. So we applied that to the Germans, and when we won, a buddy of mine said, "Hey, what did you do? You think to win?" And we were talking about it. I was like, "Man, the Germans are so organized. It's unbelievable. Everything is just accounted for." Our administrative guy had a book. It was like a choose your own adventure book, right? And it was like, "Hey, if we're here and this happens, turn to page 32. And if this happens, turn to page 65. It was awesome. So the whole tournament, we had it all mapped out. So we were talking about it, and he was a business guy, and he said, "It sounds like you guys supply chain manage human performance." And I was like, I don't know what supply chain management is. I'm a sports guy. I've never had any business books. And so I went and looked it up, and it's the active management of supply chain activities and relationships to maximize customer value and achieve a sustainable competitive advantage. So is everyone familiar? Business folks probably know it really well. And so there's the 6 components of it. So first you have to have a plan, right? Sounds familiar of what I put up there. You got to know where you're going, what you're doing. These are just times that we took, and you could funnel it all down, and we started seeing patterns in our schedule that we could maximize. Then we could plan for that to what the optimal plan was for every situation. That's the kind of choose your own adventure situation. And we could pick the right drills to execute on what we wanted to and put that in there. You had to source your materials. So in sports, your materials are human capital, not iron or plastic or any of that stuff. So having the right people is massive. Ours were all focused around doing everything for the athletes. Then you had to make your product. And so for us, it was training, right? And I took you through those steps of making your product. And then you had to have a return system, right? Because when you make products, they break, people get upset, they send it back. Then you need to try to fix that product, get it back in circulation so you can make money on it. And so hopefully you saw, right, how we rehab was very similar to how we trained. And then you had to deliver. So this is the one that I really started to appreciate, is the logistics around getting from A to B and how much energy that takes. So that was really interesting. And then for us in sports, sales is all about goals, right? At the end of the day, no one really cares what you do as long as you win. And so the sales are extremely important. So these were some of the photos from the World Cup and just the facilities. We had a gym right on the pitch, so everything was right there. We could have it totally integrated. Some of the focuses we had in our training camp in building that back up, and we were in the Alps in Italy, which was a phenomenal space. Then we moved to Bahia in Brazil, where we had kind of one of the things was humidity was a huge issue. So we kind of did the obvious thing, is we're just going to live in it instead of like getting in saunas with jackets and trying to acclimatize. We just figured if you live in it, that's probably the best way to acclimatize. So all of our facilities were open air facilities. So we were constantly in the humidity. We ate in the humidity. The only place that was air conditioned were the bedrooms, so guys could get good night's sleeps. But otherwise, we were always in the environment. And then our other area, which boasted very good recovery, this was our training camp, our training base in Brazil. So it looked like a holiday place. So it was great. We'd fly out, play, come back, recover, train in our pitch that you saw in the previous slide. It was a couple kilometers away, and then when we weren't training, we were recovering. And so it was a really, really great atmosphere. These were some of the logistics things, right? Just getting everything down to times, how long it took each thing, how to optimize it, so we could just work on clockwork to get those, get everybody where they needed to be. And then the interesting thing was we won, which was great, but then I was also, which I didn't mention, I was with the Germans in 2018 when they lost. So it was good and bad in the sense that to kind of be on both sides of that fence is also kind of like my friend asked me, like, I haven't seen you in a while, what have you been up to? It's a humbling experience to, exceed expectations and win everything and then fail miserably. But the staff was essentially the same. Players were different a little bit, but it was more about here. I was always focused on the parts themselves, and what I started realizing when I went into my time in Rome was it's really about the interactions between the parts, so how those parts interact. And that's where I got onto the piece in Rome about trying to organize chaos, and I got into complex systems thinking to help have a framework to get that stuff going around.
Out of interest, was there any difference from a athletic perspective between the two German teams? I.e., if you looked at some of the performance data pre, would you have forecast that 18 would have been tougher than 14, or is that not?
I would say fitness-wise, we were about the same. In 2018, on paper, we had a better team. Mm-hmm. In 2014, not as good a team. when you look at our roster in 18, it was like unbelievable players. And I think that probably was a little part, like when we talk about the interaction between the parts, is I think we probably assumed a lot of things that we shouldn't have, and we kind of missed the checklist on a few things. And I think because we had really good players that all had their own opinions, there's 5 components. Is it people familiar with what complex systems is? Complex systems thinking. So there's 5 components. One is appreciating that it's a complex system and you're a part of it and how you contribute to it. Then just the individual, who they are, their values, and how it relates. The shared vision of the group. And then the 4th one is around mental models. So how you look at stuff. And so there's a famous drawing. I don't know if I can. I'm not a terribly good drawer. Right? And you have a person here and a person here. And this person is saying it's a 9. And this person is saying it's a 6. Right? And all they have to do if they walk and change places, they'll appreciate the other person's perspective. And so that is, I think, what got us into trouble, is we didn't take the time to appreciate everybody's perspectives of how they would see their role, the group's role in executing. And so we ended up, I think, being a little confused, which then slowed the game down, and then we got into trouble. We weren't really focused on where we were going and what we had to do. I think this is an interesting thing where looking into the future of what's happening now is around kind of this complex systems approach to injuries, right? It's not a one-to-one relationship. It's definitely a multifactorial. So this was a paper that just came out. I can't get the guy's name in the top of my brain. He's the team doc for the NHL. Essentially, he oversees the whole NHL medical. But they wrote this where if you have like basketball and ballet, you have some similar components, but due to the nature of the sport, the weight of those components are different, essentially. And so you got to appreciate all those moving pieces because they all have a factor in what leads to injuries. And then, you kind of pipeline up what are the consistent regularities, and then put them back in, test your theories, and then keep improving your models. So that was this. So one of the other, that's the article right there. That's where using data and artificial intelligence and machine learning to do these more multivariate analysis for all the data that we collect, so we can get into these models that kind of take all the data and look at variable calculations and timelines that we don't expect, right? Like it's just calculating all these variables random. So is it the average, the mean, the max, the min, the acute chronic ratio? Is it the 7-day average, 4-day average? Like we don't know. And so it calculates all these things. We can look at the injury that we're trying to assess, and then it'll go through and look for statistical relationships with all these variable calculation metrics. And then it'll find these relationships, it'll kind of pin them or highlight them, then it'll sweep the data again, and it'll keep going until it doesn't find any statistical relationships. And then it'll give you a percent mitigation rate of this kind of daisy chain occurring, so that you can then put this in an alarm system and be alerted into the system, so you can start upgrading training plans and rehab plans and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the future of where things are going in sports. And then you end up with these. So this is an actual model. This was a rugby team that had hamstring injuries. So if you're part of this team, you're 2% likely to have a hamstring injury. If your hip range of motion fell below 41 degrees, you went up another % risk, which is not a big deal. But if your acute chronic ratio, which is a measurement of load, how much you've done today versus chronically over time, if that went up to 1.38, now you're 15% more likely to have an injury. And then if your groin squeeze, which is a test for your adductor tension, goes up to this number, now you're 25% more likely to have a hamstring injury. The cool thing about this kind of stuff is all we got to do is make sure your hip range of motion stays healthy, and there's no risk. But you can start to see exactly where you want to intervene in the patterns. This is an EPL, an English Premier League team, using their GPS data. They had a bunch of ankle injuries. They lost the game by 3 points, and they had a bunch of ankle injuries to their highest producers. And so we ran their GPS data against their injuries, and if they're zone 5-6, which is their very highest intensity start-stop zones, fell below 171 meters in the last 21 days. The risk of injury went up 20%. They had a lot of heavy impacts that the GPS system could measure, was above 27 in 7 days. Now it went up another 20%. If they had a step imbalance, plus or minus 10% that the GPS could measure through the accelerometers, that then goes up. Now their risk of injury goes up 500 times. And then if they trained intensely like that, it went up 800 times. So again, the cool thing about these models is you can just say, hey, we just need to put more deceleration change of direction in there. And then again, the risk goes down to 0. So it helps us get to the kind of the real issue and where to intervene immediately.
You can build up the house from the top down, which typically doesn't work if you grab the objective, which is the top. And that's the skill. Like basketball players, they want to put the ball in the bucket. Soccer players, they want to be able to be great on the field. If you practice your skill, and that's fantastic, and you have amazing skills, and I have some really great skills that I can go and exhibit against my 12-year-old, but when I'm not fast and strong and I have to play against a guy like LeBron, then all of a sudden my skill set is really not that great. And so what we talk to the athletes about here is building the house from the ground up, and Darcy touched upon all these things, but the number one most important thing in athlete development is breathing. A lot of people don't talk about it, they don't coach it, because it's really detail oriented, it's really hard to do, and it's also really hard to grab a kid's attention. But we have a kid in the room who struggled for 2 years in a row, played like absolute terrible, when he went to BYU, because it's mile high. And we made some adjustments in some stuff that he had to drink before the game, and we did some breathing drills, and it was the first time that that team won at BYU. And you can ask them about it. The next thing is sleep. If you don't sleep, you can practice all day long, you can have the best drills, and none of it gets absorbed, you're wasting your time. It's like going to the bank, putting money in there, putting $100 in, coming back the next day and saying, okay, I got 100 in there, and they tell you, no, you got 25. None of us would do that. So if you're not talking to your athletes about sleep, you're missing it. Nutrition, hydration, Darcy covered. The movement piece is so huge. You have to be able to move. You have to have the fundamentals of movement. You got to have mobility, stability, motor control over your system. And if you can do that in a pain-free manner, it's amazing what athletes can accomplish. And the last piece is the environment. We have kids here that struggle. They struggle with school, they struggle at home, and they don't have as much bandwidth. So you can't load them up with a bunch of exercise because they don't have the ability to withstand that stress. And you have to know when to push and when to lay off. And sometimes, you know, if the program's written for 5 sets, the cool thing is we have great coaches like Kelly, Audie, Megan's not here, Deanna, Alex, and Robbie. We look at those things so we know when to push and when to back off. Sometimes you got to send the kid home, and if the dad calls you and say, hey, I'm paying for an hour, and you got to tell him, hey, your son's worth 37 minutes today because that's the best part, and you know that's the best decision for that kid on that day. You gotta be able to hold your ground. And so having a great environment clearly helps the wellness component. If you have that foundation, we can talk about all the fancy stuff, all the power development, the quickness, the agility, recovery, breathing, performance breathing techniques, all the fancy stuff. But if you don't lay the foundation right, and you don't build the house from the ground up, typically what happens is kids burn out either mentally or they burn out physically, they get hurt. And so that's a way that we use. We had a new athlete come in yesterday. This is how we talk to them. So I appreciate you guys giving us 2 minutes to pitch AW and what we do here, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Darcy and a Q&A, and hopefully you can start with what are the things that parents can do with young athletes to prevent some of the problems that you see at the later stages, and then also what the more evolved athlete, the senior guy like myself, the older guy, can do to hang in there.
Yeah, I affirm all this stuff. Like, it's just saying the same stuff, different format based on their structure and how they operate on the day-to-day. So I think the first one, it's got to be fun. Like, again, like I got 2 teenagers, and I'm a pro coach, PT. I would love nothing more than my kids were pro athletes. It'd be awesome, right? And I told my kids, I was like, I had to come to terms, and I just said, hey, I'll do anything to help you develop whatever you want, but it's got to come from you. I'm not like, I could tell you, but I'll drive myself crazy, because if I tell you and you don't do it, then I'm gonna get upset, and then it's a bad thing. And so I was like, I'm here to help you. You just have to ask, and otherwise, it's all you, because they have to love it. I think the one thing that I always use this analogy in. So it was my first big tournament was the World Cup, and it was 6 weeks of super intensive. I had the European Championships. It was the same thing, but it's intensive training. We got Gold Cup, same thing. And you show up and you be like, hey, what are we doing today? Playing soccer. It's great. Can't wait. Let's go. Do your thing. Come back next day. What are we doing today? Guess what? Soccer. And then the next day, guess what? Soccer. Woo! Next day, guess what? More soccer. And I got bored. I wanted to change things up because I was bored. But these guys, you put a ball down, and they would play. Every day they would play. And every day they would go full gas and they would play. And I was amazed. I was like, you gotta just love it first and foremost. That is the number one thing I think that takes kids from, just why they got into the sport to being a professional, is they gotta love it. If they don't love it, they're not gonna do it. They're not gonna give it their all. And it's like anything, right? You find the it is to you, and you get motivated around it, and that's what it is. So I think that is the first thing. You got to make it fun. And then especially in a training environment like this, to get kids to come in and go, it's got to be fun, right? Because kids don't typically sign up for sports wanting to go into a gym and lift weights and exert themselves, because mentally they're, it just doesn't really make sense at the time. So that's a big one. And I think too with kids, it dawned on me not too long ago actually. So when we moved to Europe, my kids were 4 and 6. And so we were going along, and I'd ask my son, like, hey, you know any German? And he'd be like, nope. I'd be like, really? How do you ask for a glass of water? This was about 6 months. And he goes, ich habe ein Glas Wasser bitte. And I was like, oh, which word is glass? And he goes, I don't know. And because they just learn in chunks, right? They don't overthink it. Because in that, if you've read any development books, you just have the white matter, right, that helps the nerves jump, and they're just super plastic, and they just absorb this stuff. And at some point, we kind of get complicated, where we were reading something when we were there, and they said at this kind of 4 or 5 years of age is when kids learn languages, they're kind of native speakers. And we were just right in that cycle. Our daughter was 4 and our son was 6. They both were fluent in German. But a buddy of mine was like, hey, your daughter sounds like a local Munich kid. Like, I wouldn't be able to tell that she is American. But your son has a little bit of an accent. Like, his German's good, all that stuff. Sounds like one of the kids, but just not quite the same. And so it was really interesting in that. And I think movement is the same thing. If you can expose your kids to a lot of movement variety early, like movement is kind of the physical piece of learning a language. And so, does anyone ski in the room? Okay, who grew up skiing from a young age? Anybody? right? Like it's kind of in your system. You don't know how you do it, you just get out and do it. For people that learned later in life, it's always a little nervy, right? You're like, okay, I've learned, I'm doing it, but I have to work a little harder. And the thing that kind of set me is I started skiing when I was 12, so not even, the young kids. And my son started skiing like he was on skis. I don't know if you'd call it skiing 2, 3, 4, right? We just out on the mountain slipping around. But then I was skiing down, and I like to think I'm fast, have a racing background, ripping around. I'm skiing down, I look to my right, and he's passing me going backwards, right? And he's totally comfortable. Like, it's just part of how he moves. That's his world, because that's where he's spent so much time. And I think, like I said, movement is like a language, and the more you can expose yourself to these movement experiences, then that's what creates your kind of house of movement. And then if you kind of move out of your house, right, like you stop moving, if you have that kind of foundation and furniture in that house, and you just said, okay, I'm leaving this house, I'm going to do something else, sedentary house, you can come back to your house, and it doesn't take much to clean it up, right? Like you just dust it off, vacuum, move a little bit, like, okay, I'm back to moving good, I can get going again. But if you don't build that house, it takes a lot more effort to kind of put those pieces in your house of movement to be able to do that stuff. So get out and move and get the kids moving, and just to get them exposed to as much stuff as you can moving. I love the jump houses like Woodward and those things where they can just go experience movement and jump around. It's amazing because the kids, just like language, is they mimic stuff. So they just see somebody, and I see this with the kids also, they see somebody do some backflip, rotation side thing, and then they jump and they go try it. I mean, it's a safe environment, so if they crash, they get up, they try it again. But within a few minutes, like, they're doing it, right? They don't know how they did it. They just kind of watched, figured it out, felt it, and away they went. And so I think as a young person, that's important. As we age, just like kind of you think about the development of kids, right? You come in this world with all this mobility and stability, you get some strength, you stand up, now you start moving, you repeat that movement, you run around, and then, unfortunately at times we get injured, but as we age, the movement piece, that mobility and stability start to struggle, right? And as soon as our mobility gets affected, then that starts affecting our balance and stability, which then puts up the risk of falls. And there's a huge statistics around falling and breaking something and the deterioration effect of that. The one other thing I would say is as you age, try and stay as strong as possible. Your metabolic system will not deteriorate, but your strength will, and it'll start to go down. And so the more you can stay strong, the better you're going to be. Because the other thing, if you stay strong, you build lean body mass, that also keeps up your metabolism. And if you keep up your metabolism, you're burning fat when you're just, or burning energy when you're just sitting there. But it takes lean body mass to make that happen. When you can book a field and all those things, there's a lot of logistical pieces. So here, Leo mentioned Sleep, a great book if you haven't read it, Why We Sleep. Unbelievable book. I get it on Audible because there's a lot of research, and so for me it's just a little easier to manage than reading it. But if you want to know all the things that this touches, it's incredible. So yeah, you'll read it and you'll go right to sleep. Right? And then you'll be like, okay, I need to go to sleep. So movement variability, play a bunch of sports. They did a study in Germany where they asked they went to all the academies, asked coaches and said, hey, who are the kids that come into your programs and do really well? And they said kids that have had gymnastics background or track and field background end up picking up the sports. And I gave the example of like the Chinese where they're taking a bunch of martial artists and throwing them on snowboards. And so if you have good movement variability, you'll get good. You'll have the tools to get the skill. And so I would just, it's around fun, motivation, like I always said, hey, if you're not into it today, that's okay, like don't go. Like we can talk about commitment, you signed up, all those things, like there's those pieces. So, those are difficult dynamic conversations, but,
The promise of sleep is also a great one. The guy he's a professor at Stanford, and remember Sherry?
Yeah.
Sherry Ma, who, if any of you guys know, Sherry Ma is a sleep performance specialist here in the Bay Area, and actually I've been talking to her about trying to come here and do a talk as well. She works with a lot of pro athletes and a lot of college and pro teams as well. And that book is fantastic, The Promise of Sleep as well.
So yeah, and then it's just making sure they get enough sleep. There was one study in there where somewhere in the Midwest, they changed the school time by an hour, and their scores went up by 200 points based on the testing that they were doing. And so I think just letting kids sleep on the weekends, recharge all those pieces.
She did a basketball study where they changed the sleep patterns of the Stanford basketball team. Their free throw percentages went up 9%. Their field goal percentage went up like 4.5%. No difference in training. They didn't do any different. Like, the coaches still train them the same way.
Yeah.
They still did the same lifting. And
We had one team, we did an analysis where it was sleep and passing accuracy in soccer. And the more sleep they got, the better passing accuracy they had. So yeah, it's not an easy answer. I would say play a variety of different sports. It's okay to miss a game here and there, right? It's a long, it's year after year, that stuff adds up. Have some variety. I have one friend he's always asked me, hey, what should I do with Nico? Where he loves soccer and he loves skiing. I was like, if he loves it, then keep going. But do other stuff on your rest days. Go bowling, go play basketball, go, do other activities that are fun. And he did great. He would go to Colorado and play with the team there, because that's where they would also train skiing wise. And so for half the year, he wouldn't play soccer, but yet he would come back into the team and end up being better than the group that had played all year, because they just get into this monotonous grind of it, and they lose that fun and snap and power. So I don't have a solid answer on how to manage it, because, as you know, the logistics of it are challenging. I think it's more around awareness and giving yourself the okay, or your child the okay, to be like, hey, if you need a break, take a break. Let's go do something different.
So just kind of curious, like you said, the youth program, the youth soccer programs in Europe, they were kind of on board, not with just specialization, not just
Yeah,
soccer.
so it's all changing now. So if you go to the bigger academies like Tottenham, Man U, Barcelona, they have, they'll bring in social dance, right? In my programs in Canada, we had square dancing as part of our things that we had to do, right? And dance stuff. So they're having, but it's like hip hop dance. And so they're teaching them martial arts stuff, they're teaching them dance stuff, so they're changing up the movement variabilities of all these things in those academies. Because some of them, those kids are in there at 12, 13 years old.
Right.
And yeah, they're mixing it up because they see the benefit. You're not just kind of a one trick
I coach track and field, and I'd just like to bounce this off of you.
Sure.
It seems to me that my endurance athletes need more strength, and my speed athletes need more mobility or flexibility. How would you train, or how would you? Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a pendulum, right? It's always a bit of a juggling act. So yeah, I would say endurance. They tend to run too much, and they need more strength. So this is a really interesting thing, actually, so I'll tell the soccer guys, hey, I can make you more fit. I can improve your VO2 if you get in the gym and get strong. Mm-hmm. Because if you can imagine, right, everything is a metabolic consequence, and the energy it takes to go from here to here is X, right, based on how strong I am. Right. Now I've improved my strength. Now the energy to do the same thing is less.
Less metabolic.
Right, exactly. So if I just get stronger, my relative strength goes up. The energy demand for the same thing goes down.
Yeah.
And so I don't have to, my metabolic system doesn't have to work as hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so to the point, getting stronger will make them faster, even as an endurance athlete. So that's one thing. And then strong and fast but tight guys,
Or gals.
or gals,
Yes.
yes, I use that in a general sense, is, so to generate power, you need a platform, right? And so if I do this, you guys may have seen this, right? So if I try and generate force,
Yes.
I can only put so much force into that computer. If I put that muscle on stretch and then push down, I get a nice little pop, right? So that's where typically people that are tight are fast, because they get on stretch quicker to be able to pop. The problem happens is at a younger person, they're more pliable. You get a little more leniency in your tissues. As you get older and things tighten up, now when I pull, right, that ends up pulling my system. And so now I'm tight and I pull up, but I can't keep a stable base. I can't generate power. So my dad would say if I had a bad throw in baseball, it was like shooting a cannon from a canoe, right? You don't have a platform to have that return force shoot the cannonball. And so you need that stability. So the hard part is, and I had a cyclist like this, who's like, Darce, I'm tight, and that's where I think I get my speed. And I was like, you're absolutely right. But that's going to come at a cost, because you're going to get so tight, your posture's going to change, your back's going to seize up. And so by the time you get to the finish line, when you have to actually go, you're not going to be able to generate power because your back's going to be torqued. And so that's where you got to work to lengthen them out. So I always say lengthen while you strengthen, or strengthen while you lengthen. So if I'm in like the world's greatest position, I'm not just hanging out here. That's the difference between the bad and the good yoga. When I'm in this position, I'm actively elongating here, so I'm getting a nice strong quad, I'm getting strong glutes, so I'm strengthening these muscles against the length of the tight muscle. So you get some what they call reciprocal inhibition. If I get this stuff to fire, this will relax more. And then I work on stability also here. So I have a good platform. Now I have more range of motion to express that power.
Good comment. Thank you.
Yep. Anything else?
Just kind of curious, is there a difference between, little boys, little girls, just in terms of this whole concept of movement and maybe
Yeah.
what one is naturally better, or maybe is a better fit for one or the other?
Yeah, so it's interesting again, when you look at kids before they go through puberty, you can't really tell, right? If we shaved all their heads, it would be hard to tell who's a boy and who's a girl. And their movement quality is the same, right? Like, I don't have to go up to a 3-year-old and teach them how to squat. If they just squat to pick something up, it's perfect, because they have that mobility and stability. So somewhere in development, things change. And so a lot of it happens when you start to sit a lot. And so when they go to school, now things start tightening down, you have different compensations, all these things happen to change. The growth spurts that happen, right? So girls tend to mature earlier, they grow faster before they've developed a good strength base. And so you end up with a lot of girls that are kind of like Bambi, right? Like long, but they don't have the muscular development to control their limbs. And that's a big part of why you see more knee injuries in girls, because they grow quicker without the stability to deal with those longer leg arms, and then they can't control that stuff. Then there's the whole cultural side, right, which is getting better. Like, hey, like my daughter was like, hey dad, I want to snowboard like a guy. And I'm like, what's wrong with snowboarding like a girl? Yeah, their knees are kind of, when I see the girls, their knees are in, but the guys look solid. And I'm like, well, you can be that way, you just got to train it. And so it's all totally possible. They just they got to get strong. And I think in our culture, right, that hasn't been well promoted with females. But now, like CrossFit, there are some strong ass chicks, and they're awesome, and they look great, and they're moving great. And so I think in those, there's kind of long-term athletic development and looking at those, what they call peak height velocity. So when you grow, when you really go through your growth spurts, those are times that you want to kind of reduce the load, because you've grown a lot, you don't know what to do with your body, you're kind of that Bambi, and you got to kind of reestablish movement patterns, quality movements, all those things, and then build up the strength for the new limbs you know, the new Olympic moves. So there are differences and there are variety, because you can have girls that are shorter, they're strong, they're good, they grow at an appropriate, you know, kind of height to weight or height to strength ratio. But then you have, like I'm working with this one gal who's trying to make the Olympics in alpine skiing. She's 6'2", she's like an Amazon, and she's like legs, and it's gonna take her a couple of years to get enough strength to really be who she could be, because she's got a lot of limbs to move in a sport that are very high G-forces. So it's trying to mitigate her risk of injury, you know, of those G-forces while trying to get her super strong. But there's no reason why they can't. I mean, there's the testosterone levels and all that kind of stuff, but there are some strong ladies out there, so it's possible.